Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Arthur. When your wife of 10 years looks you straight in the eye and says, "I want a divorce," something shifts in you, whether you're ready for it or not. Except, I was ready. But to be honest, I didn't see it coming that day. While the words felt sudden, the truth behind them didn't. I had been living in silence long before she spoke them aloud. She probably thought I'd try to talk her out of it, or at least ask her why. But all I did was take a breath and say, "Okay." She didn't know I had already let go. Before that day, I had been running on fumes. I'd been covering for a colleague who was off on vacation. The days had been long. I barely had enough energy to drive home. By the time I pulled into the driveway, all I could think about was getting out of my damp shirt, taking a hot shower, and collapsing into bed. I'd grabbed a burger and fries on the way home. I hadn't bothered to text Sophia to ask if she wanted anything. The truth was, I already knew the answer. For months now, dinners had been a silent affair, if they happened at all. She had stopped cooking. I had stopped asking. Our conversations had become short and purely functional, like two coworkers forced to share a cubicle. Honestly, it had been a long time since our house felt like a home. When I stepped inside, Sophia appeared from a living room. "Hey, we need to talk," she said. That line alone stopped me in my tracks, because no man wants to hear that sentence from his wife. For the past few weeks, she'd barely looked me in the eye. I'd ask how her day was, and she'd mutter, "Fine," without even glancing up from her phone. I'd come home to silence. And now suddenly she's interested in conversation? Still wearing my shoes, tie half undone, I muttered. "Can I just take a quick shower first? I've had a long day." But she shook her head. "No, this can't wait." And that was it. So I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door, turned toward her slowly, and braced myself for whatever came next. Sophia stood across from me, arms folded, her face unreadable, and said, "I think we need a divorce." At first, I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't hear her, but because I needed a moment to understand how she could be so calm while tearing down something we spent years building. She went on to explain her reasons by saying the marriage felt lifeless, like we were just going through the motions. She mentioned how we lacked intimacy, how we didn't connect the way we used to. She made it sound like we were strangers living under the same roof. And maybe in some ways we were. But the way she painted the picture, like it was some mutual slide into indifference, that's what got to me, because I knew better. What she called lack of intimacy was something she had used like a tool. Every time I didn't give in to one of her impulsive spending sprees, the punishment came swift and silent. Cold shoulders, turned backs, and weeks of rejection. I'd explain, gently at first, how tight things were and how we needed to be careful. But she didn't want to be careful. She wanted what she wanted, and when she didn't get it, she made sure I felt like the enemy. Her tantrums were quiet and cutting. She would make passive-aggressive comments at every opportunity she got. So when she blamed the decay of the marriage on some vague loss of spark, I couldn't help but feel like she was rewriting history, where she was the victim of emotional neglect. I asked her, "Do you really believe we're beyond repair? Is divorce the only way forward?" She didn't even hesitate, just nodded. Then, without a word, she walked over to the drawer, pulled out a manila envelope, and brought it to me. These were divorce papers, already filled out, just needing my signature. I didn't argue or plead. I just looked at her and realized I didn't recognize the person standing in front of me anymore. Maybe I hadn't for a long time. I picked up the papers and quietly walked to the bedroom. I needed my bath. I stood there in the bathroom. Every movement felt heavy because of everything building up inside me. As the water warmed up, fogging the mirror, I stepped in and just stood there for a moment. Letting the hot water hit my back, I closed my eyes and let my thoughts run loose. In that shower, surrounded by nothing but the sound of water hitting tile, I reflected on everything I had been ignoring. We used to talk about everything. Now we barely said a word unless it was to argue or correct each other. Somewhere along the line, the connection just snapped. I remembered one fight in particular that stuck with me. I had suggested we try couples therapy. She didn't even look at me, before she laughed and said, "You think I want to sit in a room and talk about our problems like some pathetic housewife?" She made me feel small for even suggesting help. After that, something in me died. She always found a way to compare me to her friends' husbands, too. I wasn't perfect, I knew that, but I wasn't careless either. Still, to her, I was never enough. After a while, I stopped trying to measure up to her imaginary checklist. So when she said she wanted a divorce earlier that evening, I should have been devastated. But in that shower, standing still under the steam, I realized I wasn't broken. I wasn't even sad. I was relieved. Her words didn't crush me, they released me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to fix something that didn't want to be fixed. I could finally stop pretending. By the time I got out of the shower, my fingers were wrinkled, my skin warm, but my chest felt lighter. I dried off in silence, put on a clean shirt, and walked straight to the bed. I didn't bother saying goodnight. There was nothing left to say. I turned off the lights, lay down, and passed out. The morning after Sophia told me she wanted a divorce, I woke up early, made coffee like I always did, and leisurely took it. I wasn't thinking about how to fix things, I was thinking / how to move on. After a few minutes, I walked into the kitchen where she was scrolling through her phone, and I told her, "I'll need a few days. I want my lawyer to look over the paperwork before I sign anything." She nodded and said, "That's fine." From that moment, her behavior changed almost instantly. Within days, she stopped coming home some nights. And when she did, she'd come in late. She'd leave for girls' nights, dressed like she was 20 again. I didn't need a detective or proof to know she was doing something outside. I just watched the final cracks in what used to be a marriage open wide. At that point, this wasn't something I could fix. When my lawyer finally reviewed the papers, he said, "Honestly, this can be done quietly." We didn't own the house. We were just renting. No kids. No joint savings account. The one we had, she took her money months ago. The car was still under finance. And aside from a few shared kitchen appliances, there was nothing worth fighting over. He made a few small suggestions to avoid unnecessary drama, mostly making sure nothing hidden would come back to bite me. I appreciated that. I wasn't out for revenge. I just wanted to be done. When I got back to Sophia about the divorce, she seemed surprised that I wasn't trying to convince her to stay. She looked at me across the table, eyes searching for something. She probably expected me to beg her, or she thought I'd fall apart. But I didn't. Then she said something, like she was testing the waters. "So you're not even going to fight for us?" I leaned back in the chair, took a breath while looking at her, without flinching. "No," I said. "There's nothing to fight for if you've already made up your mind. You want it out, Sophia." I'm just stepping aside. For the longest time, I had been the one trying to fix things, patch up the silence, smooth over the cold shoulders, pretend her emotional distance wasn't eating me alive. But something shifted in me long before she ever said the word divorce. I'd already started grieving this marriage while I was still in it. So when she finally decided to pull the trigger, I wasn't exactly shocked. I was relieved. For the first time in a long while, I could finally breathe. Before the final meeting with the lawyer, before the papers were signed, and before Sophia even agreed to the last adjustments, I had already quietly leased a new house. I just packed up what was mine and made the move, one box at a time, in silence. The very next day, after she agreed to the lawyer's terms, I was gone with my things. I didn't wait around for things to get messy. I had no interest in rehashing old arguments or dragging things out. The split was straightforward, just a few signatures, and within a month, the divorce was finalized. I was surprised by how easy it was to legally separate from someone who had once been my whole world. But maybe that's the lesson. I had already let her go emotionally long before the legal part kicked in. For the first time in months, I could sit in my own space, on my own terms, without walking on eggshells or pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. I could just be. I know that sounds simple, but when you've been in a relationship where your peace feels like it's always under negotiation, that kind of silence is golden. People ask me why I didn't leave earlier, why I waited until she asked for the divorce. The truth is, I didn't want to carry the guilt. I didn't want to be the one wondering if I gave up too soon. Part of me needed to know that I'd done everything I could. But Sophia, she kept pushing, kept blaming, kept escalating until she was the one who finally said, "Let's end it." And you know what? I thanked her for that. Her decision gave me permission to stop fighting for something that had already fallen apart. After the divorce, I wasn't expecting to see anyone from Sophia's side ever again. I figured her friends would treat me like the villain, or just pretend I never existed. So when I bumped into her best friend of all people, I braced myself for some cold shoulder or a passive-aggressive comment. But that's not what happened. Not even close. It was in the parking lot outside a grocery store. I happened to have my new apartment a few blocks away from her friend's place. As I was loading bags into the trunk, I heard someone say my name softly. I turned around, and there she was, my ex-wife's best friend. She used to come over to our place sometimes. I never really got the sense she liked me much. But now, she looked at me with something more sincere. Like she actually saw me. She said, "I heard about the divorce. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry things ended the way they did. You didn't deserve that." I stood there for a second, not sure how to respond. It was so unexpected that I didn't even know what to feel. Then she added, "Honestly, Arthur, you were always good to her. Some of us saw it. She just didn't know how lucky she was." That hit me harder than I expected. I think it was the first time anyone from her circle acknowledged that I wasn't the bad guy, that I had tried and wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. Then, to my surprise, she offered to help me. She asked if I needed help setting up the new place, anything. I thanked her, but I said no. I didn't want to blur lines or start anything weird. I was still finding my footing, and I wasn't ready to invite people into that space just yet. That small conversation made me start thinking. If my ex-wife's best friend, who used to be close to Sophia, could see my side, what was really going on behind the scenes? What kind of things had Sophia been saying to her friends about me? And were all of them really on her side, or were they just watching things fall apart without saying a word? That moment planted a seed. I started wondering how much of Sophia's coldness had come from her, and how much of it had been influenced by the people around her. Her best friend's kindness made me question the dynamics I hadn't seen before. And more than anything, it reminded me that sometimes the truth shows up when you least expect it, and from people you never thought would tell it. 6 months had gone by since the papers were signed, and I'd just begun to settle into my new rhythm. Then, out of the blue, I got a message from Sophia that read, "Do you ever feel like maybe we rush things?" After reading it, my first reaction wasn't anger or confusion. It was stillness. I knew something must have shifted on her end, because I hadn't left any room for mixed signals when we parted ways. So I asked her to clarify. She begged for us to meet and talk, which I kicked against at first, but later agreed to. We ended up meeting in a public cafe. She opened up. She said she'd been thinking about everything, about me, about how things ended, and about the person who'd encouraged her to pull the trigger on our marriage. Her best friend. The one I had run into at the grocery store who was acting all nice and understanding. My ex-wife confessed how she kept whispering in her ear about what she deserved, how other women had it better, and how she should stop settling. What Sophia didn't know was that the same lady was being friendly to me a week after our separation. If I had allowed her, she would probably be frequenting my home. I kept my distance and didn't entertain it. Sophia continued by saying she'd finally seen her best friend without the mask. Since the divorce, they'd spent more time together. Enough time for Sophia to notice some cracks. All those stories the best friend used to tell about her generous, affectionate husband? Lies. The man barely let her speak. He was loud, dismissive, and constantly undermined her in front of others. Sophia told me she watched her best friend shrink in his presence. The same woman who once lectured her about independence didn't even have the freedom to finish a sentence around her own husband. That's when the guilt hit her. She told me, "I spent so much time comparing you to this imaginary version of her husband, and you were the one actually showing up, doing the work, trying to hold us together." I didn't say anything. I just listened. Then she asked the question I half expected, but wasn't sure I'd hear. "Do you think there's any way we could try again?" I just looked at her and told her, No, I don't want to go back, because I finally understood what peace actually felt like. She sat there in front of me, saying all the things I used to beg to hear. I miss you. I didn't know how good I had it. I made a mistake. Maybe a few months ago, those words would have broken me. But now they felt like echoes in an empty room. The truth is, I've grown to enjoy the quiet. I've come to value my own company. There's no more tension waiting for me at the door, no silent treatment during dinner, no emotional tug-of-war every time I try to speak my mind. I've learned how to sleep without feeling like there's a storm brewing beside me. That kind of peace. It's not something I'm willing to give up. I told her I wasn't angry and I wasn't trying to hurt her. But I was done. I had spent so much of our marriage twisting myself to keep things together. And now that I've stepped away from it, I see how much of myself I lost in the process. I've got that part of me back now, and I'm not letting it go again. She tried to remind me of the good times. I reminded her of the nights I came home feeling invisible. She said she'd change. I told her she had every chance to change when it mattered. But I'm not someone's backup plan. I'm not a comfort zone to return to when other options fall through. In the end, I wished her well, and I meant it because that chapter is closed. And I'm okay with that.